Okay, hi everyone. I'm glad to see a lot of conversations going, and we'll have a chance to pick all of these back up over lunch as well. And just in the interest of time, then, let me just introduce myself very quickly. I'm Ching Wei Sooi, a policy intern with BASIC, where I work on space and nuclear issues, and I'm here on the team of SYP UK as well. So thanks for coming on over, taking time off work or studies on this Friday. And I'll keep my remarks short. I feel like it's quite a timely discussion that we're having, which is why I'm very excited to be moderating this panel. We have the unfortunate expiry of New START, nuclear modernization across the board, a decrease in nuclear transparency from France and the UK as well. And as many of us in the room here know, we also have the review conference of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty that will be happening in April, with many experts describing the treaty as being on life support. And of course, we've heard from Jane as well on the need to be worried about nuclear winter to control atomic weapons and the importance of promoting the peaceful use of nuclear energy. And to help us make sense of all of this, then, for our panel on regional and global challenges posed by nuclear weapons, we have an excellent lineup of speakers here today. I'll introduce them very quickly, very briefly, and feel free to give your own introductions at the beginning of your remarks as well. So we have Tom.Dunkinson, a PhD student at the University of Warwick, William Faulkner, PhD student at the University of Sussex, Camilla Braito and Ayleen Roy, lead coordinators at Youth Fusion, and Pablo José Cañavate, a research fellow at the African Center for Science and International Security. So each presentation will run for about 10 minutes. We'll have a Q&A that takes us up to the hour at about 1 p.m. So please prepare some questions as you're listening to the speakers. And when you're asking the questions as well, please introduce yourself, your affiliation, and if you would like to direct your question to a speaker or multiple speakers directly. And so without further ado, it's my pleasure to pass the floor on over to Tom. And here's a clicker as well, if you have slides.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you to the team for all of the efforts to put this conference together. I'm sure it's very much appreciated by everyone in the room. So to dive straight in, to not take up too much time, in 1974, India detonated a peaceful nuclear explosion in the Rajasthan desert. The Smiling Buddha detonation, as it would be called, spectacularly demonstrated some of the flaws in the nuclear non-proliferation regime, and it would be the catalyst for the creation of the Nuclear Suppliers Group. The Suppliers Group is a relatively under-examined aspect of the non-proliferation regime, which is a shame because it is integral to its operation. So the title of my presentation today is Sell Me This Atom. And I want to tell two stories that exist within literature already about selling the atom. The first is about discursively selling the atom in terms of convincing the world that nuclear technologies are a cornucopia of sorts, or a quick fix to many of the problems that were faced at the time. The second story is about literally selling the atom, selling reactors, reprocessing facilities, and entire plants, the cornerstone of which was turnkey facilities, which were just ready to go. As I say, these exist within the literature already, so I can't take credit for these stories independently. The first is mainly from Jacob Hamlin's The Wretched Atom, and the second is a collection of works mainly from Isabel Ainsley, William Burr, and Jayita Sarkar. My suggestion today is that we gain more from looking at these stories as one story in two parts, rather than as two stories. So, on to the first story. In 1953, President Eisenhower gave the speech to the UN, which would later be called the Atoms for Peace speech. It proposed the creation of the International Atomic Energy Agency, which would take contributions of fissionable materials from states and oversee their allocations to other states. Ostensibly, this was supposed to be a new chapter in nuclear openness and would be progress towards, as Hamlin put it, forgetting the bad dreams of the past in 1945. It would be a new dawn for the world with a technology that could provide endless benefits. There is considerable debate about the true purposes and intentions of the speech, but regardless of those intentions, the effects were to discursively transform the atom from destroyer to provider. So A sort of propaganda campaign began in the United States from that point onwards. It was both consorted and organic at the same time. Perhaps the most interesting one to me is Walt Disney producing Our Friend the Atom, which was an episode that compared atomic technology to a genie that would provide a solution for wishes. It would be the fulfiller of wishes. At this point, the prevailing promotion of atomic uses was firmly on agriculture and medicine. There is a good evidence within the literature to suggest that nuclear energy was not on the docket at this point to be exported. Nevertheless, the promises of the atomic age were captivating. There was increasing demand in Japan and India for nuclear reactors to help power development and industrial programs. The association of the atom with fulfillment is probably best epitomized by Lewis Strauss's 1954 quote. With the developments of nuclear technology, and I quote, "It is not too much to expect that our children will enjoy in their homes electrical energy too cheap to meter." The hopeful proclamation would be echoed a year later by the chair of India's Atomic Energy Commission, Homi Bhabha, who would say, "For the full industrialization of the underdeveloped countries, for the continuation of our civilization and its further development, atomic energy is not merely an aid, it is an absolute necessity." From this story, it's clear then that nuclear promises that proliferated around the 1950s turned gradually and spectacularly into nuclear needs. An IAEA report puts the number of reactor sites beginning construction in 1954 to 1964 at 80. The same figure from 1965 to 74 rose to 250. And these 250 they were designed to account for an energy output 14 times that of the previous decade. This second date range is where we'll pick up on our second story. This is about literally selling the atom. It is about states and industries exporting nuclear materials to other states without breaching the Non-Proliferation Treaty. During the 1960s, the UK, France, Germany, the USA, Canada, and the USSR and Japan were at this point developing a capacity industrially for reactors and reactor sales. In a lot of cases, these would be deals done with other countries to export them as turnkey facilities, as ready-to-go plants. By this point, these facilities were quite lucrative. In Canada, reactor exports were considered to be a way of addressing the balance of payments deficit. And a lot of states extensively supported the industries that produced nuclear materials. For them, it was a political and strategic boon, as well as having commercial and economic considerations. Those 7 states were engaged in quite a bit of competition at this point in order to have their materials sold. And one thing at this time that they could compete on was the terms of use. That was how stringent they would be on safeguards. So the NPT was signed not by France, but there was an immediate problem. Article 3, paragraph 2 is particularly vague and made complicated by dual-use materials that could be used either for weapons or for civilian purposes. The paragraph aimed to limit the transfer of fissionable materials to non-NPT states, but the vagueness of it, in terms of its phrasing, suggested equipment or material especially designed. As I say, vague. This problem would be a focus of the Zanger Committee, which aimed to develop a list of specific items that would trigger safeguards. It was tied to the NPT, though, and this is one of its 2 main problems. As I said, France was not a member of the NPT, and any attempt to come to a common agreement about competition would be seen as putting states at a disadvantage as long as there was anybody else who was not playing by the same rules. The other problem was that the list was inconsistent on what went on to the trigger list. Primary coolant pumps, for instance, for liquid metal were included on the list, but there were very few specifics about reprocessing facilities. India's 1974 detonation, with which I opened this presentation, is really important in this context. The plutonium for this explosion was extracted from the Cyrus research reactor, which was supplied in partnership with Canada. It was moderated by heavy water that was supplied by the US. So this event spurred a fair bit of action from the nuclear exporters in trying to fix some of the problems. What would later come to be known as the Nuclear Suppliers Group was an informal way of addressing these problems. It was not necessarily a treaty per se, it was more like a gentleman's agreement. The resulting list in 1978 was made domestic policy rather than international treaty. So rather than being bound by international law, each party to the Nuclear Suppliers Group essentially said that we will agree on these things and make it domestic. So the two stories today, hopefully when placed together, suggest that there is a bit of a through line between the nuclear promises, the nuclear needs that we suggest, and the nuclear non-proliferation regime as a whole. Essentially, demand and supply in these stories is not apolitical. What we say matters a fair bit. And I'll conclude my presentation today by making some observations and recommendations. The first is a sort of academic suggestion of a broader research agenda that focuses more on the commercial aspects within states. The relationship between the state itself and their nuclear industries is not the same story in every single state. There are a lot of differences within those relationships. If we are to understand the complexities of the non-proliferation regime and how it has been built up piece by piece, it is well worth putting these in the context of the considerations that went into them within states. The second recommendation is probably more apt for what we've been discussing today and from our first keynote panel. For civil society more generally, essentially what we say about nuclear technology matters. The hopes of the 1950s of energy too cheap to meter hasn't quite worked out the way it was promised. The suggestion here is not to abandon hope in technology, but to match our optimism within it with a political consciousness of what these things are for, the means and ends. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. And I feel like that was really useful sort of backgrounder and scene setting for our conversation here today. I particularly appreciate the importance of talking about Pillar 3 of the NPT, the obligations to promote the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, because a lot of states do care very strongly about that. And if states don't fulfill one of the three main pillars, it's not great for the regime as a whole. So I believe my colleagues are getting the slides set up. So while they're busy doing that, I might just ask you a quick question right now then, which is, you mentioned something interesting as well about the need to look into the internal relationships between states and the nuclear industries. And so which nuclear armed countries would you say then are the best at fulfilling the Pillar 3 obligations, whether through nuclear technology exchange or through capacity building? And if you could share as well, what more could be done to fulfill these obligations and what the demand signals are from the non-nuclear armed states who may be interested in these technologies?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And I'll preface my answer by saying that my research is very historically focused. So not quite speculation, but I can only really speak to the historical record that I've been researching. In terms of which are the best, the specific negotiations for the Nuclear Suppliers Group had quite a range of approaches. There was at one point a suggestion of a complete moratorium on the export of nuclear materials. I believe it came from Canada, but I would have to double check that. At the same time, I mentioned France quite specifically. France was seen both in the Zanga Committee and the Non-Proliferation, the Nuclear Suppliers Group as being the weakest link in this grouping. A lot of the negotiations at the Nuclear Suppliers Group were trying to bring in France on political terms that would be acceptable. The other party would be the Soviet Union, which took a lot of convincing. In terms of which are the best and worst, it sounds like a bit of a slithering out of the question, but I think the focus on states itself is slightly, I don't want to say oversimplistic, but it sort of puts aside the responsibility from below states. So the states themselves are absolutely very, very important in this relationship, but the industries as well also played a part. One part that I considered talking about today was the creation of the Atomic Industrial Forum in 1952. So this was an organization for the development of commercial nuclear power in the US. They would have a role to play in the 1953 Atomic Energy Act, which allowed for licenses to be provided to the private sector for a range of nuclear applications. The point here is not so much that it is necessarily an interest group-based relationship, but the sort of needs and expectations around which the nuclear industry was built informed a lot of the priorities that went forward into the creation of the non-proliferation regime. So to circle back to the question, in terms of countries, there were some specific recommendations from states in the building of the Nuclear Suppliers Group, but it is also a sort of mishmash of interests and perspectives and priorities from a lot of different actors.
Okay, thank you. That's absolutely fascinating, and I'll have to pull you aside for a bit of a chat later then. William, could I please ask you to, okay, no, we can see you on the camera, that's good.
I'm wondering, could I stand?
Absolutely.
Sitting during
yes, and we've got a clicker for you as well.
On the right.
So, Tim, do we have the slides up by any chance?
Just like,
yeah, absolutely. Well, we've got a microphone as well, if that would be
sure.
That's right over there.
Test. All right, excellent.
Yeah, and yeah, it's working. Beautiful.
Okay, wonderful. Should I wait for more introduction of myself?
No, if you like to.
I am Will. I'm a PhD student, first-year PhD student at the University of Sussex. So here in the UK, I love this terminology. I am a mature student, and therefore you are going to see a mature student presenting a immature presentation, at least insofar as this is really the basis of my second PhD paper, what I hope will become my second PhD paper. And I'm like not even done collecting data for the first one. So this is a preview, I hope, but it also means this is very malleable, and I do really welcome feedback, critique, etc. So I've spent my whole career so far as a consultant, research consultant in monitoring and evaluation, if anyone's familiar with that area. I've had the privilege of looking into many different research areas, particularly in social sciences. Never have I ever seen a place where there is a greater contrast between the potential importance to human well-being and the amount of funding and attention that the subject gets. Never have I ever seen anything like the gap in this area, and that's part of why I'm doing a PhD. So what are we talking about? Well, I'm going to zoom in, carrying too many things here. I'm going to zoom in on the non-radiological environmental effects of nuclear weapons. Now, this is commonly termed nuclear winter, but we have to be very clear that I'm talking about a really broad range of effects. Some of them would be barely noticeable under some scenarios, and in some cases, they might be barely survivable, literally for the entire globe. To even begin to talk about the strategic implications of nuclear winter, I feel like I have to start with a small litany of premises. So 1, nuclear winter science demonstrates agreement on the types and directions of all of the major physical effects. Every single paper, I think, I can say that confidently, demonstrates agreement on the types and directions of effects. That means that we can make general statements I'm from New Orleans. It's kind of in the same way that we can say, well, New Orleans and Corpus Christi are at risk of hurricanes, even if I can't tell you exactly what day a hurricane is going to land or where. Second, current arsenals are sufficient to produce non-negligible climate effects under some use scenarios. And these use scenarios, for better or for worse, well, maybe not likely, are at least broadly plausible. Third, the vast majority of weapons worldwide are under de facto or de jure sole launch authority, meaning that only one person has to agree to their launch, at least legally speaking. And finally, nuclear winter is not currently a factor in the planning of or posturing or doctrine of nuclear weapon states. And it is only rarely, if ever, mentioned in interstate negotiations and diplomacy. So I'm going to go through the briefest possible primer of what nuclear winter is, just to make sure we're a little bit on the same page. I have a poster about this. I can nerd out all day, so come talk to me later if you have any questions. First step, a nuclear weapon explodes. It might not surprise you to understand that nuclear weapons are hot. They're very, very warm things, particularly when they explode. About the famous flash of a nuclear weapon that is unique to a nuclear weapon, to some degree at least, that's called the main thermal pulse. It represents, I'm doing research on this, it's a little hard to find, but somewhere in the range of 25 to 55% of the total yield of the weapon. And that is visible and infrared radiation. It's not nuclear radiation, it's visible and infrared, regular light that we're talking about, just insanely intense light. When that hits combustible materials on the ground, it can ignite thin fuels, things like paper, leaves, twigs, etc. That leads to piloted ignition, where you can get larger fires, structural fires, etc. They can merge into a very large conflagration and sometimes even a firestorm. The smoke plume is what we actually really worry about. I'm running roughshod over all sorts of other effects, right? But the smoke plume is what we really worry about in this area. There are many ways to loft smoke and make it go higher, and there's many ways to bring it down and clean it out of the atmosphere. I can talk about those around the poster, but essentially the ingredient that we're most worried about is called black carbon. It's very similar to what you would get if you rub your finger on the inside of a chimney. It's jet black, tiny little aerosolized particles, and the place where we worry about it being is the stratosphere. So if you're not familiar with troposphere, stratosphere, that's fine. We live in the troposphere. That's where most, if not all, weather happens. And the key thing about the stratosphere is that there is no precipitation, which means essentially no precipitation. The best way to get, and the most efficient way to get smoke out of the atmosphere is to rain it out. So basically, if water adsorbing actual particles coming back to the ground, that doesn't happen in the stratosphere. So once it gets there, you just have to wait for a long time, sometimes years. And it only takes weeks. Too many things. It only takes weeks to months for the smoke, once it gets into the stratosphere, to move around the globe because it moves very efficiently horizontally. My metaphor that I often use is like kind of like putting a drop of soap on water. You see it go whoom suddenly. So all of what I've talked about so far is where there's a fair amount of still disagreement, scientific research going on, uncertainty. Once the smoke is in the stratosphere, there's a lot of agreement on what happens next, the main physical effects, and there are three of them. One, the smoke is literally blocking sunlight. It is absorbing it in the stratosphere. It doesn't reach the ground. Therefore, things get colder. Now, colder temperatures and colder air holds less moisture. Also, there's less sunlight hitting the oceans. The water cycle slows, less precipitation. Finally, when you have the smoke in the stratosphere, it's absorbing energy from the sun. The sun is still shining up here, and that is not getting down here. So what happens up here? Well, things warm up quite a bit, in a way that we haven't seen in millions of years, right, on Earth. And that heats the area where the ozone is, that accelerates the breakdown of ozone while the replacement rate stays the same, therefore thinning of the ozone, higher UV. Those are the three main effects that we talk about. Forward in my notes here. So now we actually get to talk about strategy. Sorry that this has taken so long to get here, but this is an exceedingly rare research topic. It was the vast majority of work is the 1980s, late 1980s, up to about 1992. From 1992 to 2018, there's a gap. I can't find anything. If you guys know about stuff, please let me know. I'm very interested. An example is that in 2019, some of you may be familiar with Friedman and Michael's The Evolution of Nuclear Strategy. It's kind of like the tome of nuclear strategy. Nuclear winter gets 3 pages out of 678. So that's an idea of kind of how rare this is. And within this, there is a bit of a position portfolio that I'll try and explain in general terms. whether intentional or not, in general, it's important to realize that nuclear winter has been mainly used to justify and intensify pre-existing opinions about strategy. It's not really been used to make new claims that much. There's two main camps. You could call them, the deterrence camp, which says, well, hold on, this makes nuclear war even more horrible. We knew that it was horrible, but it's even more horrible now. Therefore, people should fear it more. Therefore, deterrence is stronger, stability is greater, and guess what? We don't need to do anything. Excellent, right? It's one side, one end of the spectrum. The other end of the spectrum says, hold on, this means that now everybody's at risk, literally, not just the combatants, everybody on Earth. We have human extinction. This is not acceptable. Therefore, the only solution is to get rid of nuclear weapons. I don't see a clear through line to either end of the spectrum personally. I see a little bit that there's a lot of nuance in the middle. But what I am not comfortable with is the status quo. Just saying, well, it's perfectly fine. That jives really well with my sense of cognitive dissonance, that this is a truly global, horrible thing that is almost unimaginable, and it's very natural to want to push it away and not talk about it. But it doesn't jive with my sense of risk management. And so I think we need to think harder. Wow, this is barely visible. Sorry. Anyways, it's basically the slide anyways. I think that it is really important to make sure we're not rejecting evidence just because it's inconvenient. There's another argument that says there's expanded stakeholders. This now makes non-combatant countries intimate, very interested stakeholders in any nuclear conflict. So even if you are a nuclear weapons state, right? If you're not involved in the conflict, you suddenly have a much greater interest in this conflict. And from that, there's an argument saying that no single country can actually prevent a nuclear winter. There's no way to do that. I disagree highly. I would flip that argument on its head. I would say that instead, it is more accurate to say that all nuclear weapon states have the capacity to prevent a nuclear winter by not going into a conflict. And everyone, every state, every person on Earth has an interest and the ability to at least influence this and try and prevent it. So, everybody in the room and everybody outside this room has an interest in preventing nuclear winter. So I do think that there's room for action. There's also something called an asymmetry problem that's brought up, basically saying if there are two actors in the classic game theoretical sense of strategy, one of them is afraid of nuclear winter, the other one is not afraid of nuclear winter. Well, if the one that's not figures out that the one that their opponent is afraid of it, they could view them as self-deterred, therefore unable to launch their nuclear weapons. Therefore, they might think a first strike is an important thing to do or capable. Therefore, deterrence is made weaker. The stability is made weaker, right? So there's viewed as this sort of chasm that you get from nobody considering it to everybody considering it. There's this unstable middle. I think that ignores some stuff. For example, leadership by example. If somebody changes their policies, even if they're not saying why, you as a smart strategist would have an interest not only in saying what they're doing, but in understanding why they are doing it. It's hard to believe that that wouldn't lead you into, hold on, they're changing this because their science says what? Should we think about that? Just as an example of some way that you can kind of break down that argument. I'm going to speed ahead because I know I'm going to take too long. Many of the technopolitical fixes don't have to be made because of nuclear winter, at least in stated policy. There's many times throughout history that policy is enacted that is good for one thing, but it's based on the reasoning of another. That's fine. It also doesn't have to be made synchronously, right? We don't have to all disarm all at once necessarily, or all do anything all at once. I'm thinking of the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? Good things can happen asynchronously, where you can just do one thing and then do something later. The real thing that I want to bring to this discussion, and this is, I hope, going to answer the why should I care about this in terms of like something I'm trying to bring uniquely to the strategy area. I think that this creates a whole new scoring system for, even if we're thinking in the very basic game theoretical terms, which I know we have to get out of sometimes too. But even in that hyper-rational mindset, before it was always these scores. Individual players have scores and they're fighting and they want to win, right? Now, there's a totally separate category of score, which is a global score. It involves every player that's involved and not involved, and nobody has an interest in raising that score. Not the combatants, not the non-combatants. That does seem to change things for me. That would actually affect how I think about the strategy of nuclear conflict. Keeping this very general, there are also from that quite a few warfighting implications, if you understand the science of nuclear winter. I can talk about these, but I won't here. I'll dribble out one just as a temptation. If any of you are ever in the position where you're considering starting a nuclear war, don't do it in summer in the Northern Hemisphere. Do it in winter, January, preferably. Right? Would you have thought of that before? Do you think any of the nuclear leaders right now are thinking about season? I don't know. So finally, more to explore. Really, the message here is explore more. I think as with most things in nuclear strategy, you can use the same evidence to come up with wildly different conclusions and sometimes contradictory conclusions. And there are a few generalities that work in all cases. The key conceptual contribution I'm trying to make here is that this reframes the limits on nuclear warfare. I'm very early in my PhD, so I'm going to keep my comments more on the science side than on the policy side. But there are still lots of constrainable uncertainties. Guys, sometimes I feel like a kid in a candy shop. And I know that's weird to say about like nuclear winter, but this is such an open research area. There are so many important basic questions that have not been answered. So please, by all means, get interested. We need more research. And not only that, we need to grow and diversify the minds that are applied to this problem. I'll read only a tiny piece of this quote. This is about a National Academies report that was commissioned in 2021 to look specifically at this problem. And National Academies is pretty prestigious. It says, attention will be fixed on what conclusions the National Academies will present in light of the recent debates. Now, really, really quickly, if you've seen my poster, I want you to raise your fist. I need to discount you statistically. So I know a couple people have. Okay, so keep your fists raised. Keep them raised. Okay, for everybody that doesn't have your fist raised, I don't need the answer. I just want to know who thinks they know whether or not this report has been published. Anybody? Zero. Okay, so one person thinks they know, two people. Okay, so this is a good example. Y'all are the audience. Like I want more people in the nuclear area to be involved. And yes, it has been published. It was published on June 26, 2025. What happened on June 22nd? Operation Midnight Hammer. No wonder it flew under the radar. Okay, fine. But this is really important. This is the first time in 40 years that we have an authoritative 200 and some page, but don't worry, I have a 2-pager for you, version, a summary of the science around nuclear winter. So it's a really important moment to be looking at this. And I hope to have interested some people because this particular set of effects seems both particularly important and particularly neglected. Thank you.
And that's an excellent background there, Primer, and just myself personally, I've learned a lot from it as well, and I'm sure the people in the room appreciate the call to action as well. And this is just a right research area. You're going to get points for originality if you just look into it for your dissertation. And I really like personally your point on the potential for asynchronous change as well. I think in an age when cooperation and coordination is really fragmented and difficult, that is still like a positive message. So thank you for that. And without further, yes, of course. Yeah, if you share it all.
It was amazing.
Yeah,
Wow.
thank you.
Amazing.
Sorry? We have Camilla and Ayleen.
Yeah.
Yeah, feel free to stand if you like.
Present?
Yeah, I think see you.
Present?
Want to go in there?
Yeah. Clicker words. Good to know.
Yeah, actually, for once that's not an issue, right?
Yeah, yeah. You can just, I mean,
Pretty good.
I'm so used to
say
a little
that.
bit. 5 minutes.
That's sorry for the delay, everyone. As we just
I want to share with you who
Please.
the first time I met talked about nuclear winter with me. And I was like,
So yeah, definitely want to.
okay, amazing, great.
It was the first time hosting. And
There's, yes. Your study is nice.
I mean, actually, while we're sorting out IT then, because this, I may just take this opportunity to ask you, is this better for the online people? Can you see the screen now? Could someone say something, please, in chat or raise your voice?
Amazing.
Okay, great, thank you. And apologies again for not showing you the slides for the previous presentation, but I'm sure
They weren't that good.
Great. Well, without further ado then, could I please invite Camilla and Ayleen to present?
Just wanted to, yeah, can we put the presentation mode, please?
Hey, Tim. There's always technical difficulties. We're getting it out of the way early today.
Oh. So,
while we are sorting out the technical difficulties, if you see on your table, there is fun stickers. If you could pop them on anywhere that's visible, write your name for me, just because if you leave during the lunch break, it helps reception know that you've been allowed to come back in. Thank you.
yeah.
Sorry?
Should I go to?
No, I mean, it should be okay, but sorry for the.
Complicated.
Oh, no, there we go.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I will try the clicker for a moment. Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right. This is okay. Great. Should I begin?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for inviting Youth Fusion. I'm Ayleen. This is Camilla. And we are the renewed leaders of the team. So there was a previous Youth Fusion team, and we took over in the beginning of 2025. Just to introduce a little better, we also met as interns for parliamentarians for non-proliferation and disarmament. So we got a little bit of an insight into what it is like in an institutional setting regarding nuclear non-proliferation and disarmament. And when we got the opportunity to take over Youth Fusion, we had an abundance of ideas that we could execute, such as the Youth Hotline campaign negotiating nuclear risk. So just to explain a little bit, Youth Fusion is a globally led youth platform advocating for nuclear non-proliferation, disarmament, for peace and security. And with the new Revive team, we've also been working on connecting human security and human rights to nuclear security. That is an aspect that also goes a little bit like forgotten, because we always focus on the political deterrence and the strategy aspects of things, that what the human implications truly can be and have been and have generational impacts of. And so we wanted to start with what the hotline specifically was about. So this was the second edition. Oh, maybe we can switch the slide. It's not working. Oh, maybe not. What was our motivation and the relevance of it? So we were actually building on the legacy of the first Youth Fusion hotline and improved it towards today's needs, because today the political setting and environment looks completely different. There's a renewed nuclear conversation and debate going on with a multitude of players involved, as mentioned before. And we've noticed that for young people, because oftentimes when it comes to policy and peace and security, often it is directed to, well, for future generations, and the youth will pave the way and young people will pave the way. We see that a lot in international institutions. However, we also know as young people how challenging and paralyzing today's experience of the nuclear world and practically all of the threats are. And so we wanted to find a way and do a campaign that educates young people, but also gives them the tools to participate in policy adaptations and changes in a way that really does make sense for upcoming generations, because a lot of the kind of dialogues and policies that are still occurring are do not just relate to today's reality as such. And so we wanted to build that gap and close that systemic exclusion of youth and nuclear deterrence and nuclear policy that we've been seeing because of that paralyzing experience of young people, but also just this lack of trust in young people for these kind of things to talk about in the security sphere, and trying to provide the tools that they would require to partake. So we did this with a certain kind of project.
Sorry, Tim. Could you maybe help us move the slides? If the clicker doesn't seem to be working.
Yeah. So Camilla will explain directly what the different phases and specifically we did in this campaign. But going into this as the team, we had quite a few kind of ideas and projects, goals that we brought in. And at the end of it, we learned so much more from the participants than we ever expected. But mainly, we wanted to create not only a place where we're educating youth, but also giving young people and young participants a manner and way to truly co-create solutions, not just stamping on, hey, the young person spoke, here we move on, but rather really giving them the space to talk about reducing nuclear risk and what the innovative new solutions of that can be. We also try to create some sort of team building formats of ensuring that we're sharing the resources that we've learned in university and also our time within the nuclear non-proliferation activism field and trying to create a network as such, because the hotline, the word that we use comes from actually the 1963 hotline that existed between the Americans as well as the Soviet Union to ensure that if a nuclear bomb is actually being dropped, that the presidents are informed. And inspired with that, we wanted to create a hotline with people. So the nodes and the connection points are the individuals who are partaking to hopefully become the bridge that there is this lack of in nuclear reduction regarding youth. So moving on to the next thing.
It works.
Now it worked. Right
Because-
when I pass it on. And now it works.
Can you hear me? Okay, yes, amazing. So I would like to give you an overview of the Youth Hotline campaign. I'm sure you might have seen something on social media. We really try to amplify and resonate through social media what we were doing and why we were doing it. So we opened a call for participants in September. We were looking for highly motivated young people. And actually, we are very glad to have two of the participants here presenting today. So it's nice because we wanted a peer-driven format. So we wanted to learn from each other. And we found highly motivated people from all over the world. It's been rather challenging to operate across time zones, but the online format really ensured global participation and accessibility. So the Youth Hotline campaign was divided into 4 phases. The first one was a peer-driven training. The second part was more mentorship and networking, like creating opportunities for learning from people that have been working in the field for some time. And then we had the simulation games. So we organized these role-play negotiation exercises, which is something we're going to do going to do today as well. And also we had a public-facing output. So we wanted really to reach out more youth and also to share what we have been doing. So we started working in October. We had an intense weekend of negotiations in December. And then in January and February, we organized the last few outcomes before concluding and wrapping up the project. Now, we put some screenshots from our training sessions here, just to give you an idea of how we really strive to make this very highly specialized and dense language more digestible for the participants. It was very interesting because I think we proved a point that Gen Z span attention is still working if we're using the right tools. We made the sessions very interactive, engaging, and we tried to in between the notions, we really tried to let something stay and be memorable for the participants and also useful for future projects or careers. We also took some time for sharing opportunities in the field, and we also mentioned international student Young Pugwash, and it was very striking for us as Europeans. We're always approaching, the non-proliferation and disarmament field with so many exposure to opportunities, although it's rather challenging and competitive. We are really we are so immersed in the opportunities that we have in this continent. And so it was striking to hear from other participants coming from different countries and backgrounds asking, okay, but what's next? Because I've never heard of such a project before. I never got the access to it, and I would like to follow up after. So it was interesting to see that, we don't have to take that for granted, but we also have to work to fill that gap. We welcomed some guests that shared their experiences, and that was very enriching, also both for the participants but also for us. We heard from a previous Youth Fusion member that now is working at UNODA. We heard from a decades-long activist in the field and peace educator in the field, and we also heard from a former senior officer that worked at UNODA. So it was very, very enriching as an experience. And I don't want to go into any details regarding the simulation game. It was very fun to arrange it, although rather complicated. We wanted to create a realistic crisis scenario, but we wanted to keep it fictional and non-politicized. We started developing the scenario after June 2025, so we really thought that focusing on risk reduction, on nuclear risk reduction, was very timely and urgent to discuss. And we had this amazing session in preparation for the simulation on nuclear diplomacy, which was very interesting. So that's why you can see this kind of negotiation 101 applied to nuclear diplomacy 101, which was very fun to tailor and to explain and to share with the participants. Regarding the simulation game, participants were assigned to state delegations from nuclear weapon states, nuclear armed states, and there was also Iran, which we consider as nuclear capable state. And the negotiations were happening within the UN open-ended working group on disarmament, which I'm sure some of you are aware of. We put a screenshot of the joint document that was adopted by consensus by the participants after 2 intense days of negotiations. And here some screenshots from the social media awareness raising campaign. We asked the participants to share some insights from this experience, but also on nuclear risk reductions. And we were very positively welcomed, on social media, and just got a lot of views. But the point is, when our message reaches more youth, then maybe someone is going to be engaged after that. There's also a screenshot from the final webinar, which took place online in February. It was rather a success. We're very happy, and the participants were the real protagonists of that experience. We spoke very briefly, and then it was up to them to share their experience and their insights. And then we're very also pleased to share that the project has been welcomed very positively from institutions, and so we're arranging some. Some discussions are undergoing for further engagements and sharing the project during side events or other conferences. And also we got a formal invitation for a consultation with the UN independent panel on the effects of nuclear war, which is a big deal, and we hope to share more soon, so stay tuned. And so if I have to say in short what sets the Youth Hotline campaign negotiating nuclear risk apart from other projects is that it's the kind of project we would have loved to apply for 2 years ago when we started engaging in this field in non-proliferation and disarmament. So it's designed by young people for young people, which gives us an advantage because we were speaking the same language and we were having the same sensitivities as the participants, which created a very supportive environment. And it's very validating to get the external approval for the project, but also some of the participants shared that they were feeling comfortable to speak up and try and, just stand up, which was, thinking about other simulations, which are rather competitive. It was very, very, very rewarding to hear. We really wanted to keep the participants with a practical toolkit, as Ayleen also previously said. So we wanted to bridge theory with practice. And we are all very aware how the pipeline, discovery, education, advocacy is kind of problematic. We wanted to keep the participants with something that is going to stay with them in their future engagement in activism or in education or in advocacy. So we hope to have given some guidance for future engagement.
Yes, and so as I briefly mentioned before, we learned a lot as Youth Fusion from the wonderful participants that we engaged in, and some of the elements that were really relevant for us, aside from like leadership and also like the structured guidance and how much that can actually help them, was also understanding how maybe through especially the simulation, how the real world can learn from it and how we can actually engage more into conversation, more into diplomacy through peace. So, for example, one of the little changes and nuances that we did as we first started talking to our participants was actually we started considering changing the countries. So we tried to provide in the simulation, every participant played a different nationality and in a different country. And we intentionally wanted to change the nationality in order to also within themselves, hopefully, we did that for the participants, to allow them to not only engage with their own country and what they know about nuclear non-proliferation or nuclear strategy in their country's perspective, but also from a different angle. So in that way, on an internal conversation aspect, they are bridging the gap in communication that we often see lacks in the real world. And through that, we hope that when they come up with their recommendations and solutions in that simulation, they can be more holistic and wholesome in a truly global, peace forward thinking sort of way, which was a massive takeaway that we could have from this, as well as a gender aspect was involved. So for example, when we were looking for the participants, we wanted to not only make sure there was a balance in gender, but also not only creating a balance of gender in the participants, but also in conversation space. So we always made it clear by giving examples and exercises of when are moments that certain genders, like women, kind of don't engage when they're not 100% confident of the statement that they're going to make. Encourage them to go for it, even if they're not 100% sure of the answers that they're going to be providing. So really trying in every aspect, making peace and communication possible, like a hotline would as such. And that, in short, really made for a relevant, impactful, and resourceful, and hopefully also an empowering experience for the participants who were involved as such. And yeah, thank you for your attention. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks to the both of you for that. I think there's a lot of inspiration and lessons learned to be drawn there for anybody else who's interested in the audience to start up your own initiatives or to have sort of, collaborations and things like that. So that was great. Thank you so much. And without further ado, then, could I please pass the floor over to Pablo? Yeah, absolutely. Could we get a microphone here, please, Ching Wei? Thank you.
Working, nice. If you see that I'm moving a little bit around, it's because I'm trying to avoid this pillar, like the fourth pillar of the MPT here. In the meantime, I would like to take like some moment just to say how amazing the Youth Online campaign was, because I had the chance to participate. And if you're interested in that, I don't know if it will be happening next year or not.
Yeah.
Probably. So take a look because it's really interesting. Can we go one slide back? Okay, yeah, it's working. Okay. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I thank you very much for the opportunity to all the organizers of the Pugwash Conference for having me here. My name is Pablo from the African Center for Science and International Security. And let me dive straight ahead into this topic because today I will assess the potential of the MPT Pillar 3, which focuses on peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which I'm also very, very happy that has already been touched upon on this panel before. Basically to prevent nuclear proliferation or to prevent this decay of the non-proliferation regime in the era of a nuclear renaissance. Just to get straight to the point, this presentation explores basically whether the peaceful uses of nuclear energy can still reinforce non-proliferations in today's global, changing and challenging context. So as you see, the situation or the explanation is all about pillars here. And let me get the story straight ahead from the beginning. Basically, we have to set ourselves at the beginning of the nuclear non-proliferation era or the nuclear non-proliferation treaty. 1968, it enters into force in 1970, and it has three pillars. The first one devoted to non-proliferation, the second one devoted to disarmament, and the third one devoted to the peaceful uses of nuclear energy, which is the main focus of my presentation. Why is this? This is because the NPT is designed in a way that in 1967 there is a cutoff. This cutoff basically says it's rooted in Article 9 and basically says, well, the nuclear weapon states are those that before the 1st of January 1967 has tested a nuclear device. And this comprise France, the UK, China, Soviet Union, now Russia, and of course the first one, the United States of America. And then the question here is like, okay, and what is in it for the other states? What is in it for the states that haven't tested a device? You know, what is in it for the states that are renouncing the right to develop nuclear weapons? Well, this is the whole idea of this groundbreaking, which is also part of this jargon, like this lexicon of the non-proliferation community. And this groundbreaking is very much held in the Article 4 of the NPT, which is like within the Pillar 3, the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. And basically, it guarantees the inalienable right of every nation to develop nuclear energy, peaceful nuclear programs for motives of development, etc. Everything peaceful, everything civilian. And basically, the question now is, why does this matter today? Like, what is happening today that it's bringing me here to talk about first, non-proliferation, then how the global landscape is changing, and third, how can peaceful uses of nuclear energy play a role in it? Well, as I see it, there are two trends that are colliding. There are two trends that are running parallel to each other. On the first one, we have already touched upon it during our keynote panel and during this panel. Well, we have an increasing salience of nuclear weapons in the political discourse, and thus this is weakening the non-proliferation regime. I've just listed here a few examples. We can find aggressive behavior by nuclear weapon states. We can find an increased risk of nuclear weapon use in public discourse. I've also listed here, perhaps you all already know them. There is a crisis in arms control, you know, like the new START expired last February. There are attacks on nuclear facilities. There is a crisis of trust among state parties. So this is really weakening the non-proliferation regime. But on the other hand, there is this trend that needs to be very much scrutinized, that is the nuclear renaissance, that basically can be defined as this nuclear energy, nuclear technology momentum. But this nuclear renaissance, as I said, deserves more attention in the sense that it's, what is this really? Is this a reality? Is this a narrative? It's like asking, where is this before? You know, is the chicken and the egg or the chicken? And the thing here is that, well, concrete steps are being taken forward. As you can see, I brought here the last example, which is the Nuclear Energy Summit that just happened like some 10 days ago, I think, in which 38 states endorsed like global declaration to triple nuclear energy by 2050. We have there like national leaders like Macron. We have there leaders from multilateral forums like Ursula von der Leyen from the European Union. And then we have leaders from different organizations across the world. For example, we have AFCONE coming from the African continent, etc. The second question that we have to ask ourselves about this nuclear renaissance is, well, is it a resurgence? Like, is it like states with already developed nuclear powers programs, are they investing more on nuclear development? Or is it an expansion? That is, are we welcoming like newcomer states onto the nuclear stage? Well, actually, both of them. As you can see here, like 37% of the new reactors under construction are built in China, which already had the nuclear program. But then you can also see Bangladesh, Turkey, Egypt, that are three main newcomers. All of this idea is being framed also from a climate perspectives, and also all within the UN idea of sustainable development goals. Basically, it's saying that nuclear energy is being framed as a viable solution to advance this goal. Furthermore, there are a lot of events surrounding this that have not happened before that are quite creative. We have the development of commercial small modular reactors. We had them before for military uses, like in submarines and aircraft carriers. We have microreactors. We have growing power requirements of these AI centers. As you can see, there are like different organizations, also civil society initiatives, Nuclear for Good. We have like regional conference like the Nuclear Business Platform. We have NEISA, for example, in Africa. So all of this is colliding together. And finally, I think it's of paramount importance to notice that nuclear energy and nuclear technology is not limited to power applications. There are non-power applications, and here I've just listed a few, which are all from the International Atomic Energy Agency. And it's like how nuclear energy can really foster development, can help with issues like food insecurity, for example, via nuclear technology. In that case, is the atoms for food one. As we can see, the question continues in this sense. We can see that the majority of the members of the parties of the Non-Proliferation Treaty are non-nuclear weapon states. And what is the incentive also to be there? And you can see also I have comprised here like what are the recent nuclear developments on the field. Basically, the point that I want to get here is that Pillar 3 is not just a theoretical idea into some legal treaty, but it's provide real incentives for states to be there. Let's wrap it up this all together. And that we can find is that the non-proliferation regime is under increasing pressure. However, the current momentum behind nuclear energy presents an opportunity to reinforce this treaty grand bargain. If states exist in a world where the strong prevails and no meaningful incentives are offered for renouncing the right to develop nuclear weapons, well, the value of the treaty in this aggressive landscape can come into question. And here I've used probably the quote that is being used to explain the realist approach in every international relations course, which is like the Thucydides quote. But I just wanted to reflect on that. And now perhaps the question that you might be having is like, okay, does this mean that if these states, like in this aggressive world in which the NPT is weakening, is being weakened, and they don't have access to nuclear energy, are you saying that these states, are going to proliferate and going to develop nuclear weapons? Well, not at all. Not all states face the same threats, context, or conditions, but nonetheless, states may find themselves like less compliant, less supportive, further weakening the treaty. And I think also just to send like some food for thought here, I just wanted to throw this wildcard hypothesis. We have 5 nuclear weapon states. We have 4 nuclear armed states. But what if, in the future, like there is one more state that decides to proliferate, that decides to develop nuclear weapons, and then he does that in an environment in which the treaty is further weakened by a lower amount of non-nuclear weapon states. This is food for thought. Nonetheless, and as this has already been explained in this panel, nuclear energy and nuclear technology is by no means a solution for all. And we need to be very careful, even if it's only on civilian uses, like what are we addressing when it's expanding. For example, we're addressing dual use concerns. We are addressing nuclear latency risk. That is what we are observing now in the case of the conflict of Iran. It's one of the things that it's being framed for the conflict. And then what we are seeing is also the expansion for nuclear technology into more volatile environments and less stable regimes. This comprises challenges related to export control regimes and the transport of nuclear material, the emerging threats of nuclear security, and the political constraints associated with nuclear cooperation. And again, I send here like some more food for thought, like seeing that we have waged conflicts and that there is potentially a conflict being waged on the existent or potential development of weapons of mass destruction. If nuclear energy expands for civilian uses, but there are dual use concerns, how many conflicts are we willing to risk or engage based on the existence or potential development of weapons of mass destruction? So just to wrap all up, what can we do? What can we do here? What are the policy implications of this? Well, as I have been hinting, partially the solution is in the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the mandate of organization of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Basically, the idea here is to give more power to the agency, give more power to the organization, basically to ensure safety and security, to promote transparency, and to build trust among member states. There are plenty of programs that they are undertaking, for example, the milestones approach or the infrastructure integrated reviews, etc. But why do I say that it's a partial solution? Well, I claim it's a partial solution because political dynamics and international dynamics still matter. We must remember, after all, that the International Atomic Energy Agency is a member states organization. And just to conclude, I decided to bring the whole puzzle again together just to provide a clear response and just to leave the whole picture clear. The first thing that we should understand is that the non-proliferation regime is sustained by this grand bargain that is held by the pillar number 3, and it's centered on the peaceful uses of nuclear energy. As we have seen, other treaties, like the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, they also endorse this idea, and it has become like some sort of established international norm. At the same time, nowadays, we are seeing two trends. First, an aggressive behavior by nuclear weapon states, and second, a renewed momentum behind nuclear energy, which is called the nuclear renaissance. These trends are not inherently contradictory. Aggressive behavior risks weakening the non-proliferation regime, but this nuclear energy momentum offers opportunities for development in non-nuclear weapon states. Of course, nuclear energy is no definitive solution for great power competition or development challenges. However, it can demonstrate to non-nuclear weapon states that the EIEA and the NPT provide tangible benefits and incentives for cooperation. At the same time, these expansions imply risk, particularly related to the dual use and concerns of nuclear security. A potential way forward is to reinforce the role of the Atomic Energy Agency in promoting safe, secure, and responsible use of nuclear energy among interested states. So basically, just to close, Pillar 3 remains essential to sustaining the NPT's grand bargain. It can reinforce non-proliferation if international institutions, particularly the International Atomic Energy Agency, are able to provide credible cooperation, strong safeguards, and predictable access to nuclear technology and fuel, while effectively managing the dual-use risk associated with nuclear energy expansion. Thank you very much. I look forward to your questions, feedback, and comments.
Yeah, thanks, Pablo. I mean, it's very easy to be pessimistic when talking about the NPT, so thank you for ending on a positive note. And for a very complimentary and educational presentation, as Tom provided a more historical angle, while you covered what's happening right now, which sets up really well for what I hope to be a really engaging Q&A. So we've got about 16 minutes or so. So does anybody have a question? Yeah, well, let's see how we're feeling. But yes, does anybody have any questions immediately? Yes, so let's take Daljeet and then, yeah, okay.
Oh, I thought someone else is going first. Fine. Well, listen, thank you. All of those presentations were extremely interesting, diverse, and really well communicated. So I could ask loads of questions about any of them. But I wanted to come back to the one on nuclear winter and the kind of importance of science. So you may know that there is a UN panel of scientific experts who are looking more broadly into the possible consequences of a nuclear war for all sorts of things, including food supplies and healthcare. That was established by a UN vote, but the formation of this panel was opposed by Britain, Russia, and North Korea. And that was rather embarrassing. Can't remember where France stood. But the way that the UK government tried to defend it at the time was basically by saying, we already know a nuclear war would be bad. We don't need more work to tell us something we already know. So I'd be interested in sort of how you would respond to that. Thank you.
Let's collect one more question as well, and then we'll answer them in turn then. So Daljeet, please. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the great talks. It was really useful. And again, I will try and avoid going one by one to ask questions and try and bring it together. One small comment on the nuclear winter bit is Could you comment on if you think there's a lot of information that is still classified, and then maybe by 2040, it'll turn out there's actually tons of reports? Because your talk made me think of Only Fools and Horses, the British comedy from the 80s, for those who are not familiar. And there's jokes about nuclear winters and fallout shelters in the early 80s. So it has been part of like social discourse for a long time, even if it's not reflected in the academic media. The small question I had was about youth fusion. Why that name? I'm a fusion energy scientist. I would have been excited when I heard, and then still excited on other things from the content. But my general question, which is much more open, is about asymmetries in nuclear war and nuclear strikes and how proliferation is seen. So North Korea is marginalized from the global economy. Iran is marginalized from the global economy. But if Saudi Arabia now gets nuclear weapons, is that going to be marginalized from the nuclear economy? We've had Israeli politicians and American politicians talk about the use of tactical nuclear weapons in the Middle East. If that happens, are those countries going to get marginalized out of the global economy? I doubt it. And there's been comments from military leaders in Japan that maybe they need a nuclear weapon. Is Japan going to be excluded from the global economy when a third of our cars in Britain or something from Japan? And then does the AUKUS nuclear submarine deal, does that count as proliferation, depending on who you ask? So sorry, there's a lot of comments, but I'd be interested in responses to some of that.
Yeah, thank you. And let's collect one more then.
Thank you. Thank you so much for indeed, like it was really interesting and engaging and lovely as well to see that you're really trying to bring our generation also into the topic. And actually, I feel there is a common aspect to the different presentation is I see all the time this difference between the policy expertise, scientific angle versus the common people in their day-to-day life. And actually, this is a question that I'm asking myself all, like when I think about it, it's, do you think we can and should as well bridge the gap between this expertise, so science, policy, and people in their day-to-day life to better have a global understanding of those topics? Do you think this is the way to go? Or should questions involving non-proliferation, for example, only be for students in that area and experts? Or should it be a more global and public discussion? What are the pros and cons of such an approach? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And William, would you like to respond first?
Sure. Oh boy, we have a lot to go through. Let's see if I can keep this reasonable in length. So the UN panel, excellent chance to talk about the UN panel. And I'm glad you brought it up because it's an important addition. It is going on right now. You mentioned it's about science. I think it's interesting to recognize that the UN panel, neither the UN panel nor the National Academy's study was meant to do original research. They're both summaries of existing research. And so that the only, and now I want to move into budgets. The only money that I know about that is going to original nuclear winter research today, there's two sources. One is from the Future of Life Institute. It's about 4-point-some million, I think. We're in the middle of it, and it should shut down. There is nobody, there's no follow-on that I know about. Again, if you guys know of other stuff, like please tell me about it. I'm very interested. The second is my scholarship for coming here, so roughly 30,000 pounds. So that means that basically, and I would really love to know about budgets from the 80s. I have some guesses. Also, it was about 4 million. It took me a lot of finding, and I actually corrected something on the report by asking the questions about the budget for the National Academy's study. They were awesome, very responsive. They're, oh crap, we got that wrong, right? And basically, that was about 4 million as well. So this leads me to think that the total amount of original research money for nuclear winter is closer to 10 million, probably ever, than 100 million, say. When you think about nuclear weapons budgets, yeah, a little bit of a difference. Hey, so very interesting. That's kind of in a negative way, right? Like, oh no, we don't pay enough attention, we don't spend enough money on this. But it's also kind of cool in a positive way to think how much has been done. All of us have heard the term nuclear winter. You're right. There's a a popular consciousness about it. And I actually have the only polling data in the world about the public awareness of nuclear winter, thanks to Paul Ingram, who's also awesome. So these budgets are very tiny. I'd like to cite again, the UN's panel is doing all of the effects of nuclear war. It's an enormous remit. How much money do they have? $310,000. So I'm a consultant. If I were asked to do a budget of $310,000, right, on all the effects of nuclear war, I'd say, get out of here, right? Like, no way I can do that. The panel members are not paid, for example. I know several of them. They're not paid. They're doing this out of love, right? And so basically, this is a call for more research, right, or for more funding. In terms of the votes, all of the nuclear weapons states abstained, except for, as mentioned, North Korea and UK voting against, and Russia voting against. The only nuclear weapons state that voted for, this is an interesting one, was China. It's interesting to see them, looking good on the international stage, right, in that sense. How to respond to the calls for inaction? Well, I'm really reticent about this one because I want to, right now, where I am in my PhD, I want to really stick closer to the science. And the politics is, touchy, to put it mildly. And so I feel, a bit like self-censoring myself, right, for now. That said, I think I'll repeat what I said in my talk. It's hard to believe that an entirely new class of effect that is, just orders of magnitude grander, longer, and more intensive, and of a totally different nature doesn't change your thinking. In particular, I think I put it up in the slides, but I didn't mention it. I don't know of any other nuclear effect where you could have a nation launch its nuclear weapons, have complete military victory, receive no reply, and then still essentially have committed suicide, right, 6 months later. How does that not change your strategic thinking? So I'll leave it there as more of a question. Then let's see, I'll try and go through classification and expertise. In terms of the classified thing, this is what is flabbergasting to me. It's totally flabbergasting. I have learned as much as I've learned without having a classification, to the point where I almost view, I've had weapons people say, oh man, we need to bring you to the dark side. That's a literal quote. And I thought, well, there'd need to be a very compelling reason, because so far, all of the nuclear winter research that has ever been talked about, essentially, is in the open. And not only that, the people that figured out nuclear winter were not from the military. Right? It was a group of scientists from different institutions, but really NASA. In fact, NASA coined the term nuclear winter because they didn't want to use the term nuclear war because they felt they would be stepping on the toes of the Department of Defense. So, all interesting little tidbits in history. But to me, it's really surprising and potentially very empowering for all of us to realize that completely non-military, non-clearanced people can make absolutely crucial and important discoveries about military things. So I'll leave my answers there.
Yeah, thank you. And there's a certain kind of flexibility that you come from not having a clearance as well. And
exactly.
Talk to and speak people you can speak to as well. I'll direct Daoji's question on asymmetric motivations and possible sanctions vis-a-vis possible new nuclear armed states to both Pablo and William as well. But before that, would our representatives from U-Fusion like to answer the question?
Regarding the name, the question regarding the name.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically we inherited this name.
Yeah, basically.
We inherited this name, and it's just meant to give this imagery of young people coalescing and just joining efforts. So that's the idea. I don't remember if there was another question specifically targeting us. I think. Yeah, I would like to answer the question on whether normal people should engage in the conversation. I'm a firm believer that once you know about the bomb, it is impossible to unlearn and remain indifferent to the threats it poses. And I think that once you know the cost that nuclear weapons really have for society, then you kind of somehow have to find a way to activate. So it shouldn't be a niche topic discussed within experts for sure. The other day, actually, I did some math. I don't remember the number, but I calculated how much it's been costing individually for each person in this world, the amount of budget that was allocated to nuclear weapons last year, and it was a lot. So I think that, and the nice thing, that the potential of nuclear weapons is that, not the potential, but like nuclear weapons can be the counter arguments against nuclear weapons are so diverse that even in a wide range of, you can convince and persuade people from different perspectives. So sometimes people are more attached to the harmful dimension of nuclear weapons. Sometimes, I think for experts is also the ineffective rationality. Like we always think that nuclear deterrence is effective, whereas some might argue that actually they're not. So there are different perspectives from which you can attack nuclear weapons and argument that they're not actually enhancing security and they're not the ultimate resource of safety and survival. So and of course there's international law. There are so many points you can bring up, and everyone should know. Of course, then it's always like you cannot be specialized in everything, but I think that if people would know the cost that nuclear weapons bring to society, it would be really key for enhancing social activation and pressure on leadership. So that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you. And William? Oh, sorry, please.
No. Well, just to add a little comment on people engaging, and there was briefly a question about scientists and policymakers who should engage and involve. I think everyone should engage, and one of the key things that we've noticed as Youth Fusion engaging with a lot of different fields is that engineers and scientists who are involved in development, emerging technologies and development in nuclear proliferation, there's no ethical standards and no ethical understandings that they're intentionally taught. There's a lot of some physicists who come into this field I've spoken to, they tell me, we've never had ethical knowledge or understanding of the implications of the things that we're making. And those are also some of the elements that advocacy needs to focus on. Sorry, William, please.
No, please.
Yeah.
No. Sorry, I meant to direct that to Tom. I'm just going to blame the chat. That's my bad, but please, Tom.
Yeah, on the point about exclusions and marginalization is what I took the notes down. A lot of the discourse about technological advancements that were associated with nuclear materials, especially in the 50s and 60s, involved quite an implicitly racist and masculinized identity around it. It required rationality. The story out of 1945 was essentially this triumph of man, and usually in this story it is man triumphing over nature and taming or domesticating the atom. What sort of appears as a strand in a lot of the discourse then is that in order to possess and use nuclear technology, it requires a lot of rationality and expertise that a certain type of people have. Now, the point, I think, about why the Smiling Buddha test was so spurring for especially Western parties to the NPT was that this assumption sort of ran through that what was required of technology couldn't be possessed outside of this area. So on the point about marginalization and sort of exclusion, it does involve, a lot of the discourse does involve a sort of implicit assumption within the content of what is being said about this technology and who this technology is for. Now, the events of the 1970s, we can probably discuss whether that changed at all or whether that continues to today. I'd probably make the argument that it does continue to today quite strongly. But again, the preface that I mentioned at the start was that my research is mostly on history, and that is the historical discourse.
But we have someone who could tell us about the active discourse then.
Working? This one? Yeah, well, first of all, Very much, I agree with your point. There is a lot of research to be done in this, specifically historical, but also nowadays, on this quest for scientific equity. Because pretty much during the second half of the 20th century was this idea that the atom, like the power of the atom, like whether for military or for civilian purposes, can only be earned by civilized Western nations, etc. But when you actually look into historical accounts, you see how many crucial contributions to this nuclear history have not actually come from these civilized Western nations. I've done my research on Africa, and the amount of scientists that they collaborated, like in different nuclear programs, native ideas, it's absolutely amazing. And I would like to continue building on this asymmetry that you have mentioned of the treaty. And then I think this is part of the discourse on the treaty, because the NPT by itself, by nature, is asymmetric. It has a clear distinction between nuclear weapon states and non-nuclear weapon states. And while non-nuclear weapon states, they renounce the right to develop nuclear weapons, well, the nuclear weapon states can make pledges or have the duty to make pledges for disarmament. But as we are seeing, like, these pledges for disarmament are nowhere to be seen. And this is also part of why the review conference are discussing this topic so profoundly. Basically, nuclear weapon states, they can ramp up their arsenals. They have the right, let's say, to do so. And they are doing it nowadays. So this also showcases the asymmetry. Then on the question of the marginalization from the global economy, I'm taking this question not only as marginalization from the global economy related to nuclear technology, but from the whole global economy. Well, of course, the answer, it depends on what state, but I pretty much agree with you in the sense that for certain states there is no marginalization at all. And I'm going to bring here a catching clear example, which is the case of Israel. Israel possesses, it's known to possess nuclear weapons. It's not part of the NPT, and it's not marginalized in the global economy. So yeah, I think this is a matter of interest. The great response is like, it depends on the state.
Yeah, thank you. And can I just quickly, we are cutting into lunch, but could I just quickly check if there's any burning questions? Otherwise, we're happy to continue this conversation. Yes, please.
I'm not sure about the technical implications of this, but when we talk about nuclear winter and the deployment of those weapons, it seems to me, in my understanding, that this is a very global, big scale, quote unquote, nuke. The question is, what happens if a country decides to use a smaller scale one? I'm thinking, look at, let's say Russia is stuck in Ukraine. Putin says, look, I just take one small city, and just the psychological impact of it will guarantee me victory. What is the counter argument of that? And if I misunderstood the scope that was mentioned, can you please explain then? Thank you.
And you have an opportunity for one more question, anyone. Yes, please.
Mostly for Will, but with the exception of North Korea and maybe China, no nuclear testing has occurred in about 30 years. How are you evaluating the effects of nuclear weapons in today's world?
Will, you have 2 minutes to answer these.
Okay. Help me understand. You mean evaluating the climate effects of nuclear weapons or testing? Okay, it's good because it wraps into the same, it's kind of all the same answer. You don't actually need a nuclear weapon. What you really need is a huge fire, really huge fire on a scale that nobody here has ever seen. This is, massive, massive fire. And it can happen. So for example, and what you really need, like I was saying, is stratospheric smoke, particularly stratospheric black carbon smoke. That's the condition for a nuclear winter. The more of it you have, the worse it is, the thicker the veil becomes, right? And It's a good time to mention also, it's actually, this is something that I feel like nobody really realizes, and it's a phrase I'm trying to get put out there a lot. The first soot is the worst soot. Remember that, okay? What it means is there is a nonlinear response. In other words, you can saturate the stratosphere. And at some point, adding more soot means it's still dark, right? It was dark and it's still dark. So the first soot is the worst soot. And we talk about the amounts of soot in terms of millions of metric tons. That's so 1 million metric tons is, I think, 2 point something Empire State Buildings, or something like 3 of the world's largest oil tankers. That's the amounts of soot we're talking about. So you need really big fires. Doing things underground doesn't set fires. Lighting off a nuke over an ocean doesn't really set fires. Lighting it off over a desert doesn't set fires. So you need to think about, where is the flammable material? This is a direct strategic implication. If you don't have a map of fuel loading, of the amount of density of fuel around your target area, man, you are setting yourself up for some surprises.
Thank you. And with that, let's have another round of applause for an excellent panel.